Michael Shermer exposed mischaracterizing his academic affiliations by Anthony J. Hall and Joshua Blakeney.
It's discrediting, it's a shame and a disgrace to the academy, to the university, and to your colleague, David Ray Griffin, who you haven't obviously read.
University of Copenhagen, is this to be denied? Are you the denier?
You're the denier. You're the denier.
You're a conspiracy theorist, sir.
The following information provides an insight into the degradation of the academy, which can arise when there is a lack of proper oversight and scrutiny of those who disseminate messages which are implausible and at times fraudulent, but due to their power-serving quality are able to go under the radar of academic scrutiny. On September 23, 2010, I accompanied my MA supervisor, Professor Anthony J. Hall, to a lecture at the University of Lethbridge entitled Why People Believe Weird Things, delivered by Dr. Michael Shermer. Professor Hall is a full professor and founding coordinator of the Globalization Studies Unit at the University of Lethbridge. Shermer was advertised on the University of Lethbridge webpage as the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine, executive director of the Skeptics Society, and adjunct professor of economics at Claremont Graduate University. During his lecture, Shermer touched on the area of research which both Professor Hall and myself take an active interest in, namely the conflicting interpretations of what happened on September the 11th, 2001. The field of 9/11 studies has bourgeoned since 2001, with scores of academics, politicians, journalists, architects, engineers, firemen and women, pilots, lawyers, and millions of global citizens questioning the official conspiracy theory, with dozens of books emerging which demonstrate major flaws in the official narrative. The Journal of 9/11 Studies, institutes such as the International Center for 9/11 Studies, as well as professional movements such as Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and Pilots for 9/11 Truth, have made this interdisciplinary project one of high academic quality and prestige. Michael Shermer, to the shock of Professor Hall and I, invoked the generic label conspiracy theorist to attempt to smear such professionals who investigate 9/11.
But of course that's not what the conspiracy theorists think is the right conspiracy. They think it was an inside job. An inside job by none other than Bush.
Those who Shermer disparaged as conspiracy theorists constitute a vast global constituency. A Scripps Howard poll found that 36% of US citizens thought it was somewhat or very likely that US officials either participated in the attacks or took no action to stop them. A September 2008 Angus Reid poll showed that about a third of Canadians believed the United States government allowed the attacks to happen, with 16% believing that the US government made the attacks happen on 9/11.
The Bush administration orchestrated 9/11, flew those planes with remote control devices into those buildings after taking the passengers off the planes and gassing them somewhere else.
If you read any of the credible 9/11 literature, you will see that nowhere is it alleged that the Bush administration gassed the passengers on the hijacked airliners. Shermer's characterization of those who dispute the official conspiracy theory of 9/11 stands in stark contrast to the diligent methodology of scholars such as David Ray Griffin.
For those Americans who accept the official interpretation, 9/11 was a surprise attack on the U.S. government and its people by Islamic terrorists. For some Americans, 9/11 has a more complex meaning. The second group, while accepting the official interpretation of the attacks, thinks of 9/11 primarily as an event that was used opportunistically by the Bush administration to extend the American empire. This interpretation is effectively presented by writers such as Noam Chomsky, Rahul Mahajan, and Chalmers Johnson. For a third group of Americans, the name 9/11 connotes an event with a more sinister dimension.
Michael Shermer claimed to have read all of David Ray Griffin's books, and then went on to compare those such as Griffin, who are skeptical about 9/11, with Holocaust deniers.
The say is, I read Ray Griffin's books, I've read all of them. No, there's still this continued shouting. That's what bothers me. Same thing with the Holocaust deniers. You know, they were screaming and yelling in the early 90s about, you guys can't answer this and that about the Holocaust. And so we did. But they still kept telling the same story.
Shermer's rhetoric and ability to use satire to mask his lack of substance and ambivalence towards empirical evidence created a vigilante atmosphere in the lecture theatre in Lethbridge, which stymied the flow of ideas and allowed Michael Shermer to get away with bizarre generalizations which were the equivalent of saying, all anthropologists are racists, all sociologists are homophobic, only in this case it was all those who question the government's version of the events of 9/11 share the logic of Holocaust deniers. The critical questions asked by Professor Hall and I led Michael Shermer to threaten to eject my graduate studies supervisor from the lecture theatre.
Do we need to have security escort you out? Would you like me to do it?
When I was asked to turn off my camera and question this decree, I was defamed by one member of the education faculty at my university, who said that there should have been a sign saying, "No assholes allowed." This certainly seemed to be an odd way for a professor to speak to a student whose only crime had been to ask critical questions of a man who had just implied that his own graduate studies supervisor was comparable to a Holocaust denier. Shocked and stunned by Michael Shermer's unscholarly approach to 9/11 studies, and perplexed by his general disregard for those members of the Academy who have critically investigated 9/11, Professor Hall and I undertook in-depth research into the substandard satirist Shermer. We were particularly concerned that the estimable Claremont Graduate University, which produced the Dean of 9/11 Studies, David Ray Griffin, was having its name besmirched globally by the unskeptical, vulgar rhetorician Michael Shermer. As Professor Hall canvassed the website of the Claremont Graduate University, he stumbled across something which could have profound implications for Claremont, the University of Lethbridge, and the Academy in general. On the list of adjunct professors of economics at the Claremont Graduate University, Michael Shermer's name was noticeably absent. Yet, Michael Shermer had been advertised to the students, faculty, and members of the public attending his lecture as adjunct professor of economics at Claremont Graduate University, thus providing a veneer of authority to cloak his poorly researched lecture. Professor Hall immediately contacted Dean Schrodel, who is the Dean of the School of Politics and Economics at Claremont. Hall wrote, "I noticed when I checked your faculty website, I did not see Dr. Shermer listed among the adjunct professors of economics. Does this absence result from a mistake of your webmaster, or is Dr. Shermer misrepresenting himself and his relationship with your school?" Dean Schrodel responded tersely, stating, "I have absolutely no idea who this man is." Professor Hall then contacted the president of Claremont Graduate University, Dr. Joseph C. Hoff, to corroborate the obvious conclusion which could be drawn from Dean Schrodel's comment, namely that Michael Shermer is not an adjunct professor of economics at Claremont Graduate University. In response to Professor Hall's email, the Claremont president opined, "I did not know anything about Professor Shermer until I received your email and did some quick research. He, Shermer, does not hold any term or permanent appointment in the university." I sent an email to a known accomplice of Shermer's, Professor Paul Zach, who is a professor at Claremont Graduate University. In response, I received an email from Michael Shermer, who wrongly thought that I'd be intimidated by the fact that he'd forwarded the email to administrators at my university. That's the same officials who failed to properly check Shermer's purported credentials before advertising him as an adjunct professor of economics at the Claremont Graduate University. In that same email, he leveled an ad hominem attack on Professor Hall, comparing him personally to a well-known Holocaust denier. I responded to Shermer in an email in which I stated, "I notice that you provide no evidence to confirm that you hold the position of adjunct professor of economics at Claremont Graduate University, as you were advertised to an audience at my university. Was the University of Lethbridge misled to believe that you hold that appellation when in fact you do not? I think this is a serious matter." Shermer's reply was very curious indeed. He wrote, "If I am, as some have suspected, an agent of disinformation for the US government to divert attention away from the real 9/11 conspiracy, then you would think that they would have provided me with paperwork documenting my adjunct professorship, not to mention my doctorate. I have nothing to send you in that regard. I trust you will take my word for it." Neither Professor Hall nor I had raised the subject of who is or is not working as an agent for the US government. However, since Shermer raises the subject, it might be useful for the universities implicated in this fiasco to inquire who exactly is funding Michael Shermer and institutions such as Skeptic magazine, which promote egregiously unskeptical attitudes to those in power.